Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana M.A. and
Jackie Sanders. We're two art professionals sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
We talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop a new episode every Tuesday.
On today's episode, we're so excited to have as a guest Isabel Lu. Welcome, Isabel.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Of course, we're so excited to have you here to talk about your creative journey, balancing the multiple worlds that you're in as a creative mind, as well as recording a bonus segment about challenging preconceived notions through art for our podcast supporters at levelupartist.com. But before we dive in, let's go ahead and share a little bit more about your background for the listeners who might not be quite familiar with your work.
So Isabel is a Chinese-American visual artist and health equity researcher, born and raised in North Carolina. Isabel studied Western nutritional science as an undergraduate student at Cornell University, and then public health and dietetics. I don't know if I said that right. As a graduate student at UNC Chapel Hill in 2022, Isabel was the artist in resident at Durham Art Guild, where they developed a participatory body of work exploring identity through food and stories. Currently, Isabel is one of the 2023 emerging artists in resident at Artspace in Raleigh, where they are focused on using community-driven art to support the well-being of Asian American creatives and communities in North Carolina. Isabel's work explores ethnic, sexual, and gender identity through food, history, and relationships. After learning from BIPOC food justice leaders such as Robin Wall Kimmerer and Karen Washington, as well as traditional Chinese medicine practices, Isabel began to understand that our relationship to food, our environments, and our bodies was much more complex than Western scientific methods could capture and communicate. Isabel explores what can be considered science, evidence, and truth by paralleling and contrasting these standards in Eastern and Western perspectives.
And of course, this is a very formal introduction for our listeners with an extensive resume already. But Isabel, how would you describe your artwork to someone who's never seen it before?
Yeah, well, thank you for that intro. I think visually, my artwork is mainly like portraits. I do a lot of oil paintings, very close up. I typically will have like Asian American people from the South as my subject matters. Um, I get inspired by color a lot, so you'll see a lot of like my portraits are very colorful and in different color schemes. And I don't know, I would describe it as like glowy, like if that makes sense. Like that's
Mhm.
like the vibe I'm like trying to pull off. But yeah, that's like visually how I describe my work. It talks a lot about like what you said, like the history and like their stories and emotions and relationships. But yeah, I think that's what my work would look like to people.
Yeah, it's definitely colorful, and especially some of the fruits in one of your more recent series. It looks like you can pull your hand through the canvas and just grab, a fruit and keep eating, or that the person you're portraying is like almost like reaching out and like trying to share the fruit with you. I don't know. That's the kind of perspective I get with some of them. And I don't know, it's a lot more intimate than just a stoic portrait of a person, still lifestyle. It's a lot more dynamic than that, and the colors are definitely vibrant. So right up our alley on that for sure. But we're curious, Isabel, and to give other people kind of like a little bit of a little more background. When did you first become interested in making art?
Yeah, not to sound dramatic, but I literally was drawing like the second I picked up a pencil at like 1 or 2 years old. Like I think my mom still has like my first drawing and it's like a semi representational face. So I was always like a shy kid. So I was like never really talking in class. I can remember in high school, like I was just like I didn't have too many friends. Like I was always like very quiet. But for me, like art was like literally always there. I was drawing and painting throughout childhood, and high school. Literally had like a sketchbook in my hand all the time. Um, like got started in like manga art and like thinking about anime, but then like very much like loving portraiture. So art was like literally always there. I think when verbal communication was difficult for me, the visual arts was a way for me to express myself and feel comfortable in my own body and like relationships with other people. So I don't know, I never really thought about it. I just like painted and that was it. I think I didn't really think about it until, like, after not painting for an extensive period of time during undergrad and graduate school, I, like, got back into it and really it meant so much more to me. But yeah, I was literally just always drawing. I never really thought about it. It just always felt natural.
I love that. And I'm curious too, especially when you're saying like taking a break from undergrad and graduate school is typically a field of research that not many what people think of traditional artists study. It's the sciences. So what made you feel compelled to go towards that? And then how do you feel like now your role as a health researcher ties in with your creative mind?
Yeah, so, during high school, I went to a, magnet high school in Greensboro that was it was a public school that you basically auditioned into, and it was, like, visual and performing arts.
Mm.
So I went there for visual arts, so literally half of my day was, like, art classes, so I got a lot of exposure through that. Um, and I was, like, toying with the idea of, like, going to art school for college, and even, like, my parents asked me if I wanted to go, which was, like, for an Asian household, like, very uncommon.
Yeah, that's a
And
big thing.
no, yeah, I think I'm, like, very lucky in the fact that my parents were really, supportive in, like, my art practice. But I was the one as an 18-year-old, I was like, "I don't know if that's, like, the most financially responsible decision I can make right now, like, 70K a year to go to art school and, like, little job security." So I got very interested in nutrition and the idea of, like, food as medicine when I was, in high school as well. And I don't know, I was always, like, a very, like, driven, passionate person about the different interests I had, so I thought, like, if I was, like, so passionate about this and there's, like, avenues of, like, being a dietitian or a scientist or, a doctor, this might be a better route for me to go right now. So I entered into my undergrad at Cornell, really interested in the idea of food as medicine and, like, using food to, heal people, as more of, like, the physician route, so I was, like, pre-med, like every naive 18-year-old is, and I very quickly realized when I got into college that, like, most people, well, a large chunk of people don't have access to healthcare or are very underinsured, and, even if you do have the privilege to be able to go see your doctor regularly, you'll see him for maybe, like, 30 minutes a year, and, like, who really listens to their doctor? So, I thought if I really wanted to make a larger impact on, like, communities and health, that I would have to do that outside of a traditional doctor office. Plus I didn't wanna take physics, so I didn't wanna do the pre-med route anyways. So I went more of, like, the public health route, thinking about, like, the structural, systematic reasons why we might not have access to food or healthcare or, other resources we would need for, community well-being. And I got really interested in health equity research as an undergrad and then ended up coming back to North Carolina to do my master's in public health at UNC. Um, but there was something about academia that was just like tough for me. It was like I like the structure of it, like, having a research question and like asking about things that you're interested in and like developing these theories and like planning out how you're gonna investigate this and then carrying that out and then sharing that with people. But it was always like very limited in who we could reach and who has access to this information. So I completely I'll, like, back up a little bit. I completely stopped painting during undergrad and part of grad school because of just, like, time, money, those kind of constraints. And I finally got back into it kind of during the pandemic, and I think when I started painting again, I was like, "This feels right." I don't know how to explain it better than that, but it was just, like, the way that, like, I would, like, paint during the weekends and all week while I was, like, working, like, 60 to 70 hours a week, I was just thinking about, like, the weekend where I could paint again. Um, so I ended up wanting to I do really love research, so, like, during the final year of grad school, I did apply and get into some PhD programs to do more health equity research, so I was interested in, looking at, food access, but not only food access, like, culturally appropriate foods and the environment in which we get food, for BIPOC, marginalized, and, like, Asian American populations. I ended up getting into my dream program, but I just, like again, not to sound dramatic, I, like, ended up crying and not in a good way. I was just like it felt so overwhelming and, like,
Mm.
something that I was like, "I don't wanna do this right now." I was being drawn more to painting and art, and I felt like art is so integral to our, like, community health and, like, our well-being as, like, individuals, but also, like, a larger scale as well. And that's something that, like, research can't not to say that they can't capture, but it's very hard for traditional Western scientists to understand that. If it's not, like, quantitative, right? If it's not, like, something numerical or measured, in a lab or, like, by statistical software, like, they just can't grasp that it's, like, a phenomenon that's, like, happening. So I ended up declining my offers and, like, not having a real plan, but just knowing that I wanted to pursue something between, like, the intersection between, like, public health research and arts. So, yeah, and then I applied for a residency at Derm Art Guild, and I ended up getting it, which was incredible, and, like, all these things happened, and here I am, but, not to say, like, I had a plan or anything, it just kind of things, like, happened, and I, like, showed up and, like, took opportunities and just said yes and, like, collaborated with amazing people. But yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but
Yes, yes.
that was like yeah.
That's amazing. No, and I love that. I love that idea of like, yeah, I mean, when we all are at that college age, I mean, we think we have a plan. We really have no idea. Once
Mhm.
you're in it, then you're just like pivot, 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 pivot. And for anybody that either hasn't had that experience, if they were alive during 2020, they understand the whole pivot. Things don't go as planned. So I'm really interested in diving in a little bit deeper in this. I love it, love it, love it. I also love that idea, and I do want to confirm. So how soon after declining the PhD opportunities did you get into that first residency? I'm interested in that timing. Like, how long was that pocket of time?
Yeah, so I graduated, I applied for my PhDs in the fall of 2021. I got my acceptance in the spring of 2022, so last year, so around, like, February, March. I think I declined around, like, April, and then, I had one more, internship for my dietetics program in the summer, so that was
Mhm.
around May, June, July, and during May and June is when I applied for the residency, and I got it in July. Yeah, so
Wow. So
it
that's
was
a
really
really
quick.
tight timeline. And I think that's
Yeah.
Mhm,
such a powerful message for listeners too of I think many people can resonate with that idea of whatever your like long-term dream would be, whether it's an academia setting, whether it's like climbing the corporate ladder. You're like, this has always been my goal, and I'm just like head down working towards this. And then you hit that milestone in that moment, and it might not be what you expect it to be. So I
mhm.
appreciate you sharing that and the authenticity there too, to be like you cried, but not in a good way, because it's one of those pivotal moments where you realize like you're almost building this life that you don't necessarily want to be living anymore. And I think a
Yeah,
lot of the time people can kind of like suppress that voice and be like, no, but this is what I'm quote unquote supposed to do. This is the path that I am on, without allowing yourself to have that moment of reflection to be like, is this still what I want? Like, just because I set this goal 3 years ago, do I still want to be doing this with all the knowledge and exactly with 2020, the changed life perspective that I have now? And so I commend you on one, acknowledging that, okay, questioning, is this really what I want to do? And then also having the courage to pivot, because I think as all three of us on this call and many of our listeners can attest, like once you really are in line with what you feel like you genuinely are just supposed to be doing, what just feels right, like you mentioned, it's well worth it. It might not feel as scary as that first moment once you just dive in, and it's much better than living a life that you feel like you're just trapped in.
yeah, because yeah, like you said, it's like when you're, that young, like, who really wants to, like, look back and say, like, "Oh, I, like, really needed just to follow the advice of me when I was, like, 19." Like, that's just, like
Right.
I don't think anybody wants to do that. I mean, maybe, like, some people, like, have always been, like, interested in, like, being a doctor since they're a kid, and they grow up and they follow that, and they're an amazing doctor. But that's not everybody, and that's not a lot of people, so, like, why would we, like, hold ourselves to, like, strictly like, this is a goal I set when I was like 21 and I'm just gonna follow it like almost blindly. And not to say that like being a researcher or academic is like a bad thing at all. It's just like for me, it felt like a little limiting in what I felt like I could do. Um and Yeah, the pandemic had a lot of the influence, I feel like, for a lot of people, like you said. Like, it just, like, made you, like, sit and reflect a little bit of, like, "I could probably die. I don't know if I wanna do this anymore."
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yep, nope, totally, totally relate with all that. I spent over 12 years in corporate finance. It gets to a point where you're like,
Mhm.
so am I climbing the right ladder? Like, am I building a career towards something that, yes, I get satisfaction on, but is this my calling? Like, is this what I'm supposed to do while I'm roaming the earth, so to speak? And I know
Yeah.
definitely pandemic definitely had a reset type question like that for a lot of people too. But I do like to, and I do want to make sure I mention it, the fact how you said like, yes, you stop the PhDs. That doesn't mean you can't pursue it later, though. Like, you
Yeah.
already have your academic credits on it. And it's like, that's something I had to think about when I quit my full-time job, my corporate job, of like, let me treat this as a sabbatical in a way that made it feel a little less dramatic, if you will. But it definitely, there was a lot of tears too. It definitely felt dramatic, all those relationships, all that career, all those things, all the things you've been building, and to suddenly walk away when there isn't necessarily a direct correlation, or there doesn't seem to be a direct correlation between what you've been doing and what you're doing now. And the answer is there is. There's things that carry through, the business side or the research stuff that's now showing through art. There's stuff that carries through. But I like, and I want to make sure I highlight that idea of like, you put it in the back burner, just
Mhm.
because you're saying not now doesn't mean never. You could always pursue that PhD later. Maybe you'll pursue it in something else. Like, it doesn't have to be, or maybe you'll just do art, forever and ever. I mean, that's or balance that with another job. Like, that's okay too. Like, it's stages of life. You can always change it. It doesn't
Yeah,
have to
no,
be one
I
thing.
completely agree, like you said, like, treating it like a sabbatical. That's kind of how I was treating it at the beginning, trying to, like, convince myself, like, "Oh, I'll go back for my PhD someday." And who knows, maybe I will, and, yeah, like you said, like, academia is always gonna be there, your corporate job is always gonna be there, like, if you have to go back, like, as your, like, plan B or C, like, you can, but, like, I think just being open to different possibilities and different opportunities is good. And like you said, like, I don't think I would ever go back for a PhD in, like, nutrition or, like, public health even anymore. I think I would, even if I were to go back, because I do love research, something more open and expansive and interdisciplinary, like an ethnic studies or like an Asian American studies program would be really amazing, where like I could combine like research with the arts and community and like think about like phenomenon or like ideas that are more yeah, expansive than just like a set public health issue. So
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. And that does sound interesting. But looking at your creative routine now that you've made that pivot and committed to these multiple residencies that you've done in Durham and now at Art Space around the corner from Adriana and I, um, for your creative routine now, like what role does daily or just a consistent creative routine play in your process? What does that look like for you?
yeah, so I I am doing the residency at Art Space, but I also have a full-time job and then two other side jobs and then this residency on the side. Which is like difficult to like, I wouldn't say difficult, it's just like I have to like balance it a lot and like think about my timing and like my schedules.
Mhm.
But I definitely make it a priority to be in the studio at least most days of the week. I think at least like 5 to 6 days a week. Maybe not. Yeah, maybe 6. Like on a good week. Yeah, so
And you're
like
definitely
during
one of the artists that can attest that kind of our conversation before, where it's like, if you choose to climb the ladder, make sure it's leaned up against the right wall, to where artists might get a bad rep sometimes of being like frantic and disorganized. But so many artists that I've met, yourself included, are like super resourceful, great with time management. It's like, because we are also always juggling so many things, to
yeah.
having a full-time job and two side jobs and an art residency, to where I think artists can, it's just the powerful nature of when you're really committed and driven to do something, you make it work. And
Mhm.
it sounds like, I mean, I feel like you're in the studio all the time. So I didn't even know about your two other side jobs, and you had this full-time job. So that's very impressive.
I no, I appreciate it. And I guess like as on a side tangent, like I feel like it sounds, to some people, I feel like it sounds impressive that I was gonna do a PhD, but, like, honestly, being an artist, and juggling all this stuff and, like, seeing what you guys do as, like, full-time, like, artists and, like, this is your business and your passion, I feel like artists are, like, way more resourceful, time management savvy, smart, like, s just, like, so much more has to go into, like, being an artist from, like, the admin, the business, the creative side, the networking than like a researcher. And maybe I'm like dissing research now, but like all you have to do is kind of like show up and like jot down some numbers and like write a paper and like collaborate with some people and like teach a little bit. But like I feel like I've learned so much more in this past like year, just as a
Mhm.
person and as like a researcher and like a business person and all this stuff than I have in like my 6 years in academia. So like it's
Yeah.
been incredible to even like learn from you guys in art space and like everybody else. But
Mhm.
um yeah, I guess going back to the your original question, I do try to be in the studio and paint at least like 15 to 25 hours a week, I would say. Just for like to just to feel like for a personal level, just to like feel like good. I don't know. Like you know how like when people like work out, they get like endorphins and they just like feel like relaxed in their body.
Mhm.
I feel like if I don't paint that day, I just feel like something's off. And like I can't believe I like didn't paint basically like for 4 to 5 years. And that's probably why I felt so like just off for like the longest time during college. So I definitely prioritize being in the studio and painting just for like my mental and like my personal like well-being, but also like to be able to um have that practice and like yeah, be consistent and like mentally prioritizing this as like where I want to be and going in the future. So yeah, it's just like a lot of time in the studio either painting or like having meetings related to art or anything like that.
Yeah, and so much of what we do is basically we're creative problem solving. So I think a lot of what you're mentioning is so when you go to a regular 9 to 5 type job, it's like somebody else has done a lot of the scoping of the work and like solved some of the problems and even assigned who's going to solve the problem. So it's kind of handed to you, and then you just only have a tiny piece of the giant puzzle versus when you're running your own business you have to see how all the pieces go together and then constantly balance like all your different clients. Because if you have a mural here and then you have a commission there and then you have like your studio work and then you have a gallery, it's like you have all these different, almost like different employers, including yourself, um, and trying to see how it all fits together. So I feel like, personal opinion, it's like same, it to me it's like I don't know, it's like you're preaching to the choir of like, yeah, it was much different when I could go to work, solve the one question that I've been asked to solve that day, so to speak. And then at the end of the day, I close that book and I go home, and that's the end of that. And then art is just so it permeates everything in my life at this point. Like I can literally be driving down the road and be like, oh, that would be a cool wall to paint on, right? Or I'll be at the grocery store and I'll be like, oh my gosh, the color of that mango. I want to mix that color. Like it's just in everything. Like it's not no longer something that can be separated. And then again, it's like as artists we're problem solving, but we're creating the problems too and then trying to solve them. So it's always like, can I mix that color, can I paint that wall? Like it's always those questions. So I feel like you get to understand yourself a lot better when you're in that constant mode of trying to solve all the time. I don't know, just like activates something in the brain. I have no proof of this, people, but I'm pretty sure that's the way that one works, for sure. But speaking of balancing all these different demands, all these different things, so you're doing the health equity research side of things, the side jobs and whatnot. You also do community projects. You've painted murals as well. You have to create your studio work. Of course, you have personal life. There's more things involved. How the heck do you stay organized?
Uh, that is a great question. I wouldn't say I do it well because I feel like I used to be like a very organized person in college, like being on top of like emails and like writing back like promptly and like all these like things. And now I feel like it's like slipping, just because of the nature of like so many things that are happening. But I would say that like I try to like connect what I'm doing in like my individual art practice with like the community arts that I'm doing, but also with like my day jobs and everything, so that like I'm like pulling things that I'm learning from each of them and like redistributing everything together so that like not that I'm like double dipping my time, but basically that I'm like connecting all of these things so that I'm like trying to um just like use my time more wisely and like bring things I learned from one thing into like being a better employee or like being a better team member for another thing.
Mhm.
So that I'm like connecting all these relationships and networks and expertise and knowledge together so that like it it feels more organized in my mind.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that would be like higher level stuff. I mean, like the boring stuff like my Google Calendar, I don't know, like checklists on like my phone, that kind of stuff. But I would say like, yeah, just like trying to connect everything in my mind, and try to connect people as well as like how I stay organized and how I like try to support like the different projects I'm on and the different like roles I have to play as well.
Yeah, I think that's so smart. And we talk on the podcast a lot and to other artists as well as thinking of everything that we do as artists, spending our time or as business owners. You're just pretty much the lifelong journey of adding skills to your tool belt. And so I love talking about how, because I also have a day job in digital marketing. And I always say it's like I'm a full time artist with a full time day job based on how much time I spend doing both things. But there's definitely like skills I learned at my day job about SEO, about email marketing, about social media strategy that I then apply to my art business. Or if I'm in the studio researching like video production and experimenting with that, then I can bring that to my day job as potential offerings or potential services. And so it's, I feel like it's not so much like double dipping, is more so like they're all just in line with where you are going. And so it's
Mhm.
there's overlap for sure, but I think I love how you mentioned like that makes you a better employee. Because I always say like if I didn't have my art business, I would not be as good of an employee to my day job team because it energizes me. I learn those skills and it I think everyone should have that thing outside of their day job if they work for someone else that energizes them, that kind of gives them that motivation and energy to show up as their best selves, whether it's a creative practice, whether it's working out, whether it's trips and hikes, whatever that thing is, of your identity outside of your corporate world, which is very
Mhm.
helpful.
Yeah, no,
um
I think that's really interesting
mhm,
because I also I work in communications too, so like similar, kind of similar to marketing, and like I've definitely like like through my job I have to like like write newsletters and like press releases, and like I've been on like in rooms where people are writing grants, and that's definitely helped me in my art practice and in like my attempts to like be more of a business with my art. But at the same time, like I'm able to bring like my knowledge of like art and like painting into like the graphic design I have to do for my job. And it just like works out. And like instead of like being a full-time artist, and taking the time to like take a marketing class or like a class to like learn how to do a newsletter, I'm like already doing that and getting paid for it.
Mhm.
So I think it's like actually cool for like artists to have like different roles outside of just being artists, because it makes you a more well-rounded person and an
Mhm.
artist and a business person. And you get to kind of break up the day so you're never like really bored.
yeah, absolutely. And another factor of not keeping things boring is having public facing studios. So I am curious with both of your residencies, how do you feel like interacting with the public in a community facing studio or just a residency space has affected your work in your creative practice?
Yeah, it's been really cool. I'll say one, I am like very much an introvert. So like I don't love the idea of like that big wall of a window that I have on my studio, but it's fine. Like usually I'm like in the tucked in the corner, so not too many people come by. But it's no, it's been really amazing because I've been able to like connect with so many people like within the arts community, but also just like the public, through just having a studio here and at DAG, that I would not have been able to do if I just had like a studio or like a private studio or like just painting in my apartment like I used to do. So that's been amazing. Also just like the opportunities to like talk to people and explain my art through like First Fridays here in Raleigh or Third Fridays in Durham has
Mhm.
been amazing because it's just practice and like learning how to like speak consistently and like concisely about your ideas and the way you portray them and how it connects to both you and the person you're talking to has been really really great. um I will say that like I I'm not in love with like how historically like white and upper middle class like the arts scenes have been here. So like a lot of the people who've come by have not look like me or maybe other people in my own community, and that's just a little, I don't know, it's just a little sad for me because I would love to like share my art with more of those people, and for whatever reason, whether they feel like they might not belong here or they just have never really like had the routine of coming to a place like art space, um it's yeah, it's just a little sad. I would like to, which is why I'm like trying to create more opportunities in the arts and like share my art through other ways, to bring in more like queer and like Asian American and BIPOC people as well into the arts so that they feel like there's a place that they belong in. Um, but yeah, it's been great in terms of like networking and like finding ways to like develop my own like public speaking skills as well and just getting connected with a lot of really cool people.
Yeah. I definitely relate to that part too when you're saying they don't look like you. Same, same. Like I wish there was a lot more Hispanic, Spanish speaker, just BIPOC folks in general that would come by the space. And I don't know how much of the cultural side of it has to do with it. Because like I remember growing up, it was like if it was an event, like an art fair, sure, you would go to that. Like there's artisans and there's crafts and things like that. But like or you go to the museum. But ours, like where we work, is such a special place. It's an in between in a way, where it's like I don't ever remember going to artist studios growing up. Like it just wasn't a thing. And with other Hispanic persons that I've spoken to, same thing. Like where they grew up, whether they grew up in the States or in another country, it's not like a thing you do. I mean, you go for an event. So if there's like a Latinx or Hispanic Heritage Month type thing event, they'll go to that. But like it's almost like artists are so mystical in a way as well and so mysterious, and there's like this level too of respect and honoring their process. It's like you also don't want to impede upon them or like I don't know, like you don't want to bother them essentially, and honestly it's not. So I find myself in the same way, like also telling other folks like, hey, you can come, like let's add a little spice to this, like let's have a little more variety of people coming through. Like this is for everybody, this is not
Mhm.
just for one specific group. So I do feel like too, luckily, like the events that Art Space puts up is helpful, right? All the different kinds of events highlighting different groups. I think that's helped a lot for sure, as well as the Art Space roster of artists having changed over the last few years as well. And there's, I like to call it the variety pack. There's a lot more of us of different ethnicities, sexual orientations, the whole shebang. That kind of helps with that too. But yeah, I definitely find like we do have um a lot more of that where we're also educating in a way, and we can dive more into that, you know, when we do the bonus part of the episode. But there's been more of that like educational level, so that when I'm talking to other folks, whatever, if they look like me or not, it's a lot of like this is welcoming, this is for everybody, this is free, like this is educational too, like it's enriching in both ways for sure.
Mhm. Yeah. And from your experience, Isabel, I am curious. Again, we can dive more into it on the bonus content, but is there an organization that you have found that, like a public art space, whether it's a gallery or residencies, that you find blends that gap really well, or a specific idea on how we as a Raleigh arts community can do that?
Ooh, that's a great question. I'll just say from my experience, I've gotten more involved with NCAT, so the North Carolina Asian Americans Together.
Mm,
They're a nonprofit here in Raleigh, and they mainly do like try to like increase civil engagement in terms of like voting registration, and yeah, all that sort of stuff with Asian Americans, try to like activate that. But they've also like they just held a big public arts festival in Durham for the Asian American Heritage Month last month in May, called Common Roots, where they had like a bunch of like art vendors and like
mm.
performances. They had drag, they had singing and dancing, sumo wrestling, which was cool.
Very
So
cool.
that was, yeah, it was really fun. I think like somebody in the audience actually like went up and like wrestled the guy. So I was like, that's interesting. I would not volunteer. But no, I think that was really, really cool to just to see so many amazing, like, creative Asian Americans, like, being celebrated in that way and having the public come out and supporting. Also, there's a student organization at NC State that holds, like, an Asian American, art, like, I don't know what's called, like, an art, like, showcase, every single
Mm,
year, and that was in March, called Crane. In terms of, like, other art organizations, obviously, like, Art Space, like you guys said, like, I think is doing honestly a lot in terms of, like, having that kind of diversity in, like, thought and experiences and identity throughout the artists and the events.
mhm,
Um, I think, VAE obviously does, like, a lot to showcase, like, BIPOC and queer artists and, like, different experiences and different, like, abilities and, perspectives. Um I'm trying to think of any others that I know, but I think from just my experience, like those are like really amazing organizations.
Mhm.
I would love to obviously like have more opportunities and like trying to like do more workshops and like create spaces where like are dedicated to specific certain groups that are maybe underrepresented in the arts kind of world. Because like you said, Adriana, like when I was growing up, and, like, even speaking to Asian Americans nowadays that I know, like, they would always say, like, "Oh, like, when I was a kid, I was like I love drawing and painting, and I was, like, so
Mhm.
creative." And then they just, like, kind of fall off during, like, college and afterwards, either because of, like, tiger parents or just, like, societal pressure of, like, you look like this, therefore you should be a doctor,
Mhm.
engineer, lawyer, blah, blah, blah. Or even just, like, as, like, an adult, like, I feel like people think of arts sometimes as, like, a silly
Hobby.
yeah,
It's a
a
Just
great
like
hobby.
hobby.
lighthearted and fun, and they don't take it like as a
And you paint
serious
all
Mhm.
day.
research endeavor, which I
Yeah,
think
which
as
is,
we
like,
talk
fine to do, but, like, also it is, like, a career you could have and, like, nobody or maybe it's just my experience, like, it's not seen as, like, a legitimate thing that you could, like, live off of and, like, pursue, and like you said, like, there's, like, research aspects to it, there's, like, business aspects to it, there's, like, so much, and, like, nobody really told me that. So,
right. And even
yeah,
all
just
those amazing organizations you just listed off, like, I mean, and people that we have on our podcast, you can be artists, but also like art industry professionals. Like
Mhm.
all of these nonprofits need marketing coordinators and people that
mhm,
write grants and people that go out in the community and engage them in education projects. Like those are careers, whether it's through a
right,
nonprofit or a for-profit art service company, that they're all needed too. And
I
most of them
know.
all are artists on the side as well.
I feel like we need an episode on art careers, and I think then we could, like, link it to people and be like, "Give this to your parents." Because, like,
Yeah.
seriously, a lot of the people we interview, graphic designers, there's developers, there's, curators, there's museum and gallery owners, like, there's all these different things, and it's like, they're all creative. It doesn't just have to be like, you paint on a canvas and that's it. There's all
right.
these anybody that works with anything Netflix, that's art too, you know what I mean? Like, actors, nobody questions acting. You can make millions of dollars, but the moment you say you're a painter, they're like, "You paint houses? Because
Mm.
otherwise, how are you gonna eat?" And it's like, "Oh boy, okay, we gotta unpack this, and this is gonna take like 45 minutes, and I don't have time." But for sure, for sure, I think we definitely should do an episode on our careers.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a great idea. Yeah.
I would
Uh,
listen to it.
yeah, especially for, yeah, some of our younger listeners too, of like, "Hey, I wanna go into the arts," but, like, what facet of it? Just like a brainstorming melting pot of
I think
ideas.
I'll
I love
starve. You won't starve. There's
yeah.
ways.
I love that. But kind of to wrap up our conversation from before, I do, Isabel, I love that you were able to like plug so many organizations here in Raleigh. And I think, of course, we have to give a shout out to our art space executive team and how amazing they are with Carly Jones and the whole team of, I've loved being able to see that shift, and it's even compounding even more and more of integrating different types of art forms, whether it's music, whether it's performance in visual art spaces, hosting different types of events. And I think the biggest thing, if we have any art administrators listening on here, or maybe community leaders, educators, is really embracing and working and collaborating with those other organizations like the ones you mentioned, whether it's a specific social group, whether it's a specific form of art that you want to collaborate with, because all of the resources and groups are out there. And then in that mindset of community over competition, like, okay, let's do an event that collaborates these three different organizations and brings all of those audiences together. Because I think, especially, I would be hoping during COVID, and especially now after, as it's melting into the minds of everyone, as we had that time to sit and be still in the community and really realize that just because, okay, we're going to this event up in Durham, that doesn't take away from the Raleigh arts community. Like things like, okay, you have first Friday, you have second Friday, you have third Friday, and then we can all go to all of them, and it's great. And so just having more opportunities for everyone helps. So I love that. But for you as an artist, I'm going to pivot back to your career a little bit. How do you find and choose opportunities for yourself to grow your creative career?
Yeah, that, I think I've been, like, asking myself that as well in, like, the last, like, year or so, because, um, I think like you mentioned at the very beginning, I've done murals in the past, and that was really because, like, I've never done a mural and I thought it would be really fun. It was just, like, a big big ass canvas that I could just like paint on, and it was really cool to do it, because like there was money involved. It was a new experience. I was learning. It got my name out there, and I think there's a lot of like opportunities and money in mural making. But for me, it's like I would, I think there are like I could definitely have like a career doing murals, but it's not something like I'm like super passionate about. Like I'm not gonna like take the time to like take out all like a whole month of my time just to like paint a large wall about something like I don't care about. So like for me,
Mhm.
and I think having the luxury of like having a day job and like having an income and like benefits and like health insurance from something else that like is not part of my creative outlet has been really great because I don't have to ever bring in like the equation of like money into like the opportunities I seek out or say no to. Which I know like some of my friends who like went to art school like don't have that kind of other income outlet. Not to say that like going to art school is bad or good. It's just like that's what they've told me. So for me, whenever I try to make sure that like I'm aligned with like the people involved in that opportunity, making sure that they understand what my work is and like what my intentions are and understanding their intentions and making sure that that aligns. But also, if it's like, I don't ever want to just like take another opportunity that I'm like not learning from. Like I'm never wanting to just like repeat something that I've already done. So making sure that like I'm able to like learn something new or having an opportunity to grow in that opportunity while doing something that like I'm familiar with and that like brings some sort of like something back into like me or my community. So making sure like people are paid equitably if that's an option. Or it's like reaching out to like having an audience that I'm not familiar with, but also like being accessible to an audience that like I feel connected to as well. So those are like things I like think about when I'm like thinking about opportunities that I should say yes or no to.
Mhm.
I absolutely love that. That ties in perfectly with the next question I have for you, and also with it mirrors the experience I'm having right now with murals. It's what I'm hearing and what you're saying. It's very much something that like resonates in my brain a lot. It's that idea of alignment. Like it has to be aligned. If someone's like, "Can you paint?" Not saying this would never happen, but not in the foreseeable future. If someone's like, "Can you paint our logo for our muffler shop on the side of the building?" No,
No.
no, it's not my jam really. Can you paint an abstract mural about like this BIPOC, theme or things like that? And of course, I'm not figurative like you are, so for me, it would have to be very abstract. But like this thing that ties in, or it has to do with my style, or I have my creative voice is part of it, and I can bring other communities into it. Yes, so I'm with you on that. It's like I don't see myself doing muffler or donut shop signs anytime soon. If I need to say yes or no to an opportunity, it definitely needs to be in alignment with what those longer goals are. So I think that's exactly what you're going with. Which brings me then to my related question is, have you actually said no to a potentially lucrative opportunity, and what made you decide to say no? Can
Um
you paint XYZ or like,
I mean, I think just to be honest, like I don't think I'm in a point of my career yet that I've had like a lot of like really lucrative opportunities come my way.
yet,
I mean, I have,
yet?
yeah, I appreciate that. But no, I mean, I've had like some people like come up to me and just ask like, "Hey, would you do a commission of like my dog or like my partner and something?" And I'm just like,
Mm,
I'm busy. I'm so sorry. I have like so many projects like in the next like month. Like, let's like rehash this like in a later time. But yeah, if it's like just I don't want to say it's busy work, but it's busy work. Like I don't think I'm like in a place where like I want to do that or even I have like yeah, just to be honest, like I don't think I have time to do that because I want to be pursuing other ideas and like exploring other questions that I have rather than just like painting a dog. Also like I can't paint dogs, so like that
Right.
would be out of the question. Um
Yeah, and to your note, what you said earlier is kind of the silver lining luxury, I guess you could phrase it, of having a day job where you have a set income and insurance and benefits and all those wonderful things. When we interviewed previous artists, one of them said, I believe it was Sterling Bowen was saying how having a day job he feels like keeps his artwork authentic because he doesn't have that pressure of having to factor in sales or profit or anything like that. Or as with this dog portrait example, like you don't have to feel like you have to say yes to it just to make rent next month or to fund another project. And I feel like that's one thing that, um, especially if you have multiple jobs and the amount of time actually in the studio is relatively narrow. Like, okay, if I have 7 hours this week to be in the studio, do I really want to spend 3 of them doing this dog portrait? Like, and for some people, the answer might be yes, because the money's worth it, but it does add a layer of, okay, you want that time to be fully and authentically in your research, in your creative voice aligned with what you want to be doing. So,
Definitely.
Yeah, for sure. Well, next up, we'd love to ask all our guests about how they define success. But first, we want to put in a quick word from our sponsors.
this episode is brought to you by our Level Up Artists podcast supporters.
If you have gotten value out of listening to our podcast, please consider becoming a supporter for $4 a month. This podcast is our way of sharing it forward, and we get so much value out of these conversations ourselves, but producing a podcast isn't free.
We have personally invested in podcast equipment and video editing software, as well as dedicate our time to produce, edit, and distribute a new episode every week.
By becoming a podcast supporter, you will help us keep the podcast running smoothly and get access to amazing off-the-record conversations with seasoned artists, authors, art collectors, gallery and museum professionals, as well as industry leaders. These conversations offer even more valuable advice for artists at various stages of their career.
You also get access to our artist community platform and our gratitude for keeping the podcast going. Head on over to levelupartisthub.com to sign up and become a podcast supporter today.
Welcome back, everybody. So, Isabel, question we like to ask everyone is, how do you define success as an artist?
Yeah, so for me, I think just being able to like have like a consistent practice in art has been like incredible for me, and for me that's a success just because like I went so long without painting and I felt like a shell of a person that like um I never thought that I would be able to like have a studio and paint every single day. And for me, that's just like incredible and like a dream. So maybe that'll change in the future, whether or not I see that as success, but just being able to like paint constantly and being able to share that with other people and having the opportunity to like develop ideas and questions and engage people in the way that I want to, is what I would define as success. So like whether or not it's like some people like painting about, like, really dark, shitty things that have happened in their lives, and I think that's great for them, but, like, I don't wanna bring that into my art practice. So for me, it's, like, being able to, like, create art that's, like, a little bit joyful, a little bit asking different questions, um, something that is beautiful to me and, like, colorful and all of that is what I would define as success, but that I think that it is different for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And so, what is one piece of advice that you wish you had heard before you got started on your creative journey?
Um, I think I wish somebody would just tell me, like, just to not stop painting, and I'm sure, like, somebody told me that I just was, like, a stubborn 17-year-old and didn't listen to them, but, like, I think the idea when you're, like, a kid or, like, a teenager and, like, you have to pursue 1 or 2 things as, like, your career or, like, your passions, and you just, like everything else is, like, a side piece. At least for me, that
Mhm.
um, was really I think harmful because I don't think I regret, going to school and studying nutrition and public health because I think, again, I love research. I love having that kinda knowledge that I don't think I could have gotten outside of school, like the research methods, like all of the grant writing, all of that. But I just wish somebody would have told me to, like, really continue painting, if not only for, like to continue, like, that practice and that muscle memory, but also just, like, for myself as, like, a person.
Mm.
That would have been really powerful. Whether or not I would have listened to them is, like, another question, but I just wish, like, that was, like, constantly being, like, put into my brain and, like, not only the advice, but, like, opportunities in school. Because I don't think, like, my undergraduate, university was, like, very community arts oriented. There was, like, an arts program, but it was very much in, like, the fine arts. So there wasn't a lot of, like, community oriented, like, artistic opportunities for me to, like, tap into. So, yeah, just, like, don't stop making stuff. Yeah.
Isabel, I do want to counter that point real quick and actually say there's a chance that even if you had listened to that advice and you had had that, playing in your head, there's a chance you actually might not have been able to carry it through, honestly. Because at least what
Yeah.
happened to me was once I entered, like I still did art while I was in college. And, I was a business school student, not art school student. So I was always waitlisted for art classes, but I would squeeze in whenever there was a spot. But once I got into the corporate environment, working in the, investment industry and whatnot, it got to a point where it was so draining that like to even think about painting, I mean, I could bear if I even started a painting, which I did, I tried to continue practice. It wasn't consistent at all. You're working your 9 to 5, 40, 50 hours a week, 60 hours, depending the industry. The weekend, all you want to do is like go out with your friends and go out on a kayak and I don't know, go to the movies and things like you're not thinking of a serious artistic practice either. So even if you try to squeeze out the time for it, it might not be quality. Honestly, it might be more hobby equivalent. So I'm with you, like wishful that maybe I had taken it a little more seriously as well to actually say like I'm going to have a journal practice or sketching practice or whatnot. But the reality is, you might not have had a chance anyways. So there's that. So maybe the real answer to that, to tie back into your answer, would be to say like maybe to have something in our schedules and block off the time. Maybe that was the
Mm.
solution. 2020 hindsight, right? Isn't that what they say?
No, yeah, that's true. Sometimes I forget how busy like our lives were before like we took art more seriously or like we had the opportunity to take it more seriously. So um yeah, maybe the advice is just block off something on your schedule. Like even an hour a week, I think is something. So you have that dedicated time to focus. But no, I
Yeah.
completely agree.
Because we all have, I mean, we all prioritize our time differently. And I think it's that kind of that ongoing joke of like, oh, well, next Wednesday, after I have all these things on my to-do list done, I'm just gonna have all this free time and I'm not even gonna know what to do with myself. And you're like, we never hit that point because we always find things to fill our time with. And so unless you truly prioritize your priorities, they're not going to actually happen. So whether it's time with friends, whether it's research for your PhD, whether it's a creative practice, I think one big through line with a lot of people we've talked to is whether it's 10 minutes a day or an hour a day, an hour a week, it's unless you intentionally put it in your schedule, just like working out, just like making art, unless you put it in your schedule, it's not going to happen because there's rarely in the modern day where we just have lulls of a block of time where we don't have to do anything or we're not responsible for doing anything and you can just be unless you prioritize that time to slow down. Otherwise, other people's priorities will become your to-do list, which
Hmm.
is very difficult.
Plus, if you have that extra block of time, a lot of people just fill it with Netflix or naps, which I fully
Yeah,
support those two as well. So,
those
so
are
block it
wonderful
off,
things
folks.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
block it off, folks. Put it on your calendars. But Isabel, if someone randomly hands you $100, what would you splurge it on or invest in? It has to be something that brings you joy and relates to your art or business.
Yeah. So I think you mentioned in the beginning that I've developed more of a participatory practice with my art, and I think that does stem from like my research. So what I do is like whenever I am doing portraits of individuals that are outside of like just me, I really want to like understand like their stories with like their background, their history, their relationship to food, and their identity as like an Asian American from the South. And for me, that brings me a lot of joy because it's almost like a therapy session for me. I like call it an interview, but like it's very much just like a conversation between the two of us. But I also like know from like my research that like I never really want to take somebody else's story and like filter it through me who's like the one with like the voice or like the platform as an artist and like share their story through like my lens. So it's very much like more of a collaboration or partnership with them, and partnerships like everybody needs to be like respectful of other people's time. And while I have like a practice where like I am able to like maybe sell a piece or something and get financial compensation, like they're not in that position. So I've tried to more intentionally like apply to grants and get funds to be able to pay people for their time. Um so the past like 3 interviews I've done, I've been able to like pay people. So I think for me, the $100 would definitely go towards like paying somebody else to like be interviewed and have that kind of partnership and like start that kind of relationship. Not only to like because I enjoy talking to people and making friends with people. But it's also just like a way for me to invest back into like the people that I care about in the community that I'm like trying to relate to. So that's where the $100 would go for me.
I absolutely love that. That's a wonderful answer. And a perfect way to wrap up today's conversation. But real quick before we go, what exciting projects do you have coming up in the future that our listeners can support you on? And where can they stay connected to you after they listen to today's episode?
Yeah, so I have work still up at CAM, the Contemporary Art Museum in Raleigh. So all of the stuff that I did in my Durham Art Guild residency around like food and identity and relationships, all of that initial work is still up there until September, I believe. So you can check that out. I have an upcoming show at CMAC, which is really exciting, in the month of August. So I'll be showing some new stuff there as well. Um, Other than that, I'm at Art Space. Like you guys said, I'm like always there. Usually in like the afternoons and like early evenings. So if you're ever down in Raleigh, definitely check me out there. I'm always happy to like have people over and like chat with them. Yeah, my social media, I have an Instagram, which I can like share with you guys, and a website. Feel free to like email me. Always happy to like talk with people. Not only for like maybe me to give some like information, but also to learn from other people. And like make friends and like build a community. So yeah, I think that's about it for me right now.
No, that's perfect. We'll be sure to link all those things in the show notes for sure. And would you mind staying with us a few extra minutes so we can discuss challenging preconceived notions through art on the bonus segment for our podcast supporters?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, in the meantime, if you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share feedback, or have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, you can reach us through social media. I'm at May Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we are at Level Up Artists on Instagram. You can also visit levelupartisthub.com to hear the rest of this conversation and become one of our podcast supporters.
Yeah, and this will also give you access to amazing off-the-record conversations with our guests, like Isabel, the artist community platform, and it helps to keep the podcast going.
So thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.